wind hit 53 knots at 0247 hours. By 0300, it was screaming across the observation platform at 61, carrying ice crystals that cut exposed skin like ground glass. Forward Operating Base Grid reference November 7th had earned its nickname 3 winters ago, when a supply convoy driver had written home that he would rather serve a tour in actual hell than spend another 30 days at the freezer. The letter had been intercepted, flagged, and ultimately filed without action because nobody in the chain of command could argue with the sentiment. 11,000 feet above sea level on a nameless mountain plateau, a region that appeared on no public maps, the freezer existed for one purpose: to watch, to monitor the valley networks that fed insurgent supply lines, to track patterns, to wait, and tonight, after 9 weeks of waiting, the waiting was about to end. Colonel Raymond Holt stood in the operations center, his hands clasped behind his back, his breath visible in inadequate heat thrown by the backup generator. The primary had failed at 0400, precisely when they needed it most. 2 feet of new snow had fallen since midnight. The temperature on the platform had dropped from -22 to -31 Fahrenheit, and it was still falling. The storm was supposed to break by noon. The meteorological models promised a window, but models were theoretical. The man they were hunting was not. Codename, Architect. Real name still unknown after 6 years of pursuit. Confirmed responsible for the deaths of 11 American soldiers across 3 separate incidents: an IED network in Helmand, a coordinated ambush in Cunner, and a catastrophic intelligence failure that had sent a 12-man team into a kill zone and mountain pass that looked exactly like this one. Architect did not plant bombs himself. He did not pull triggers. He designed systems. He built networks of men who did his killing for him, and he'd been doing it long enough to become very, very good at not being found. Until now, intelligence had placed him at a compound 2.3 kilometers east-southeast of the freezer. A meeting with regional commanders, scheduled to begin at 1,330 hours. At some point between 1350 and 1355, according to signals intercepts that cost 2 assets their covers to obtain, Architect would appear at a second-floor window facing west. He would stand there for no more than 40 seconds, reviewing the terrain through a pair of binoculars, ensuring the meeting site remained secure. It was a habit born of paranoia, the same paranoia that had kept him alive for 6 years. In 40 seconds, that paranoia would be insufficient. If that opening hooked you, stay with me. This story gets more intense from here. Subscribe now for more real stories of courage, and hit that notification bell so you never miss one. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. Now, let me take you back to what made this shot impossible before it was ever fired. The rifle lay on the workbench in the equipment bay, disassembled to its major components. 3 men stood around in the inadequate lighting, their breath hanging in clouds, their expressions ranging from frustrated to furious. "It's the elevation turret," Technical Sergeant Womack said. He was a senior armorer, 22 years in, and he had diagnosed more weapons malfunctions than most men would see in 3 careers. "The indexing spring is shot. You can feel it when you turn the dial. There's no positive click, no detent. You dial in your correction, and the whole thing drifts back. So replace the spring," said Staff Sergeant Chun, second in seniority, arms crossed over his chest. "With what?" Womack's voice carried the particular sharpness of a man explaining the obvious for the 3rd time. "This is an M2010 ESR with a Leupold Mark V HD. You know what the supply chain looks like for precision parts at 11,000 feet in the middle of a whiteout? We put in a request. It comes in 48 hours. Maybe, if the birds can fly. We don't have 48 hours. I'm aware." The 3rd man, Specialist Harmon, said nothing. He was 24 years old, the youngest armorer in the bay, and he knew his place in this conversation was to listen, learn, and stay out of the way. But his eyes kept drifting to the rifle on the bench, the long, elegant lines of the .338 Lapua Magnum, the 32 power variable optic that could resolve a man's face at 2 kilometers, the 8-inch suppressor that added weight and length but would keep the shooter's position concealed in the mountain acoustics. It was a beautiful weapon. It was also, at this moment, useless. "What about the backup?" Harmon asked. "The M24? 7.62 NATO. Womack said, without looking up. "Effective range 1,200 meters on a good day. This is not a good day. This is negative 31 degrees with gusting winds and a target at 2,300 meters. The 338 is the only tool for this job. And right now, the 338 is paperweight. Colonel Holt appeared in the doorway. He was 53 years old, lean in the way of men who had spent 3 decades in operational billets, with close-cropped gray hair and eyes that had learned to assess situations in fractions of seconds. He had commanded at every level from platoon to brigade, and he had buried enough men to know exactly what happened when equipment failed at the wrong moment. "Status," he said. "Not a question. A demand." Womack turned. "Sir, the scope has lost 0. We've diagnosed it as a mechanical fault in the elevation turret assembly. The indexing spring has failed. We need a replacement part that's minimum 48 hours out, assuming the storm breaks and assuming logistics can get a bird in the air." Holt's expression did not change. It never changed. That was what 30 years of command did to a man. It taught him that his face was a tool, a signal to the men around him, and panic was a signal he could not afford to send. "The window is 6 hours, he said. "Yes, sir. The target has been hunted for 6 years. 11 men dead. 2 intelligence assets burned to get this location. This is a shot." "Yes, sir. I understand. And you're telling me the rifle is broken. I'm telling you the rifle cannot hold 0 with the current elevation turret. It will drift. You dial in your correction. You fire. And by the time the bullet reaches a target, the point of impact is anywhere from 4 to 16 inches off your point of aim. At 2,300 meters in 30-knot crosswinds, for inches is a miss. 16 inches is a miss by a mile. The shot cannot be made." Holt stood very still for a long moment. Behind him, the wind howled against the reinforced walls of the equipment bay like something alive and hungry. "Options," he said. "We could attempt a closer approach." Chin offered. "Get a spotter team to within effective M24 range. Say, 800 meters. Thread through the valley floor. In this weather, with 2 feet of fresh snow and 0 visibility, they'd be dead before they covered 500 meters. And even if they made it, they'd be inside the compound security perimeter. You'd be trading one impossible shot for a firefight we can't win. Then we wait," Holt said. "We hold position. We fix the rifle. We get another opportunity." "Sir," Womack's voice was careful now, the voice of a man delivering news no commander wanted to hear. "The intelligence assessment is that this is a one-time meeting. Architect knows his pattern has been identified. After today, he disappears again. Another 6 years. Maybe longer. Maybe forever." The silence in the equipment bay stretched until it became its own kind of pressure. 48 hours, Holt said finally. "You're certain?" "Minimum. And that's optimistic." Holt turned without another word and walked back toward the operations center. The 3 armorers watched him go, none of them willing to speak, each of them carrying the weight of a mission that had just become impossible. In the far corner of the motor pool bay, separated from the equipment section by a canvas partition that did nothing to block sound, Elena Voss heard every word. She was kneeling beside AM 1165 A1 HMWV, her right hand deep in the engine compartment, her left wrapped in thick field dressing that made it look like a white club. The frostbite had happened 20 hours ago during a perimeter check, when her glove had torn on a frozen support strut, and she had been too focused on the generator, repair to notice the exposure until the damage was done. The medic had been professionally concerned, personally worried, and ultimately helpless. There was nothing to do but wrap it, keep it warm, and wait to see how much function she would lose. The official record said Elena Voss was 29 years old, a civilian contractor employed by a logistics support company based in Northern Virginia. Her contract specified vehicle maintenance and generator repair. Her security clearance was sufficient to work on forward operating bases, but not to access operational planning or intelligence products. Her personnel file, the version that any curious officer could pull, showed 8 years of military service followed by separation under honorable conditions and transition to the private sector. It was the kind of file that told you nothing because it was designed to tell you nothing. The unofficial record, the one that existed in a classified database accessible to perhaps 40 people in the entire Department of Defense, told a different story. Elena Voss had spent 4 years in a precision shooting program that did not officially exist. She had trained in facilities that appeared on no organizational charts. She had deployed to operational theaters that were never acknowledged in any congressional briefing. Her confirmed engagement record included a shot at 2.8 kilometers in adverse conditions, the longest in her operational theater for 5 consecutive years, a record that still stood because the program had been shuttered before anyone could break it. And then, 3 years ago, everything had ended. The targeting failure had not been her fault. The intelligence had been wrong. The building that was supposed to contain only military-age males had also contained a woman and her 12-year-old son, hiding in a back room that thermal imaging had not penetrated. Elena's shot had been technically perfect, center mass on the designated target, a confirmed insurgent commander responsible for 17 coalition deaths. But the round had overpenetrated, fragmented against an interior wall, and sent shrapnel into the room behind. The woman had survived. The boy had not. The investigation had lasted 11 months. It had found no fault in Elena's actions, no violation of the rules of engagement, no failure of judgment on her part. It had found fault in the intelligence process, in the thermal imaging equipment, in the building analysis that should have identified additional occupants. But fault had to live somewhere. Someone had to carry the weight of a dead 12-year-old boy, and Elena's program existed in a space where institutional protection was thin and political convenience was thick. She had been quietly separated, honorably discharged with full benefits, and a letter of commendation that would never be read by anyone who mattered. She had been told her service was appreciated, her skills were exceptional, and her future in government work was over. She had been given a contractor job as a consolation prize, a way to stay close to work without ever being trusted with it again. For 2 years, she had fixed vehicles and repaired generators on bases around the world. She had watched missions happen without her. She had listened to young soldiers talk about shots they had made at ranges she could have made blindfolded. She had said nothing, asked nothing, expected nothing. And then, 6 weeks ago, she had been offered this assignment, a temporary rotation to a forward operating base in the mountains, vehicle maintenance and generator support, standard contract work. She had taken it because she had recognized the grid coordinates. She had recognized them because she had seen them before, 3 years ago, in a targeting package that had never been executed. A package that identified a compound 2.3 kilometers away, a meeting of regional commanders, and a high-value target designated architect, the same target whose network had provided the faulty intelligence that led to her shot. The same target whose operational security had ensured the bad information reached the targeting cell. The same target who bore ultimate responsibility, in Elena's professional assessment, never voiced, never recorded, for the dead boy in the back room. She had come to this mountain deliberately. She had positioned herself in this place at this time because she had known, with the kind of certainty that came from 6 years of obsessive pattern analysis, that architect would eventually return. She had not known when. She had not known how, but she had known, and now, listening to the canvas petition as 3 armorers declared a mission impossible, Elena understood that the moment she had been waiting for was slipping away. She did not move. She did not speak. For a long moment, she simply knelt beside the HMWV with her right hand still in the engine compartment, her bandaged left hand resting uselessly on her thigh, and thought. The rifle was AM 2010 Enhanced Sniper Rifle. She had fired his predecessor, the M24, perhaps 10,000 times during her career. She had fired the M2010 itself during the transition period before her program was shut down, perhaps another 3,000 rounds, enough to understand its capabilities, its limitations, its quirks. She knew Leupold optics better than she knew most people. She had rebuilt them, calibrated them, tested them in conditions from Arctic cold to desert heat. And she knew, with a certainty that Womack and Chun and Harmon did not possess because they had never operated at her level, that the diagnosis was wrong. The indexing spring was not the problem. She could tell from the way Womack had described the symptom. No positive click. Drift when you turn the dial. That was not a failed spring. That was thermal contraction. The M2010's Leupold Mark V HD was a magnificent piece of optical engineering, but it had one vulnerability that was poorly understood outside of the extreme cold weather shooting community. The scope body was constructed of 3 concentric steel rings, precision machined to maintain internal alignment. At standard temperatures, the tolerances were measured in 10,000ths of an inch. At negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit, after a 60-kilometer transport over frozen mountain roads in a hard case that had absorbed cold for 12 hours, those tolerances shifted. The steel contracted. The rings moved, not much, perhaps 0.04 millimeters across all three interfaces, but enough to create mechanical play in the turret assembly that felt exactly like a failed indexing spring. It was not a parts failure. It was physics. And physics could be compensated for. Elena withdrew her hand from the engine compartment and stood slowly, feeling the cold in her joints, the stiffness in her wrapped left hand, the weight of what she was about to do. She knew how it would look. She knew what they would say. She knew that Colonel Holt was not the kind of man who tolerated interference from contractors, especially contractors who should be fixing vehicles instead of touching precision weapons. But she also knew that if she did not act, the shot would not be made. Architect would disappear. And she would spend the rest of her life knowing she had been this close and had chosen to stay silent. She walked across the motor pool bay, pushed through the canvas partition, and entered the equipment area where Womack, Chun, and Harmon were still standing around the disassembled rifle like mourners at a funeral. "The indexing spring isn't your problem," she said. 3 heads turned. 3 sets of eyes assessed her: the contractor, the vehicle mechanic, the woman with the bandaged hand who had no business being in this space. "Excuse me," Womack said. "The spring is fine. Your problem is thermal contraction in the scope body." The rifle was transported 60 kilometers in a hard case at negative 20 degrees. The steel rings are contracted approximately 0.04 millimeters at the interfaces. That's enough to create play in the turret assembly without actually damaging any components. You're chasing a mechanical fault that doesn't exist. The silence that followed was absolute. "And you know this how?" Chin asked finally. "I know rifles. You're a vehicle mechanic." "I am. I also know rifles." Harmon's expression was confused. Womack's was suspicious. Chen's was something closer to offended, the particular affront of a man whose expertise had just been challenged by someone outside his community. "Ma'am," Womack said carefully, "I've been an armor for 22 years. I've worked on every precision weapon system in the inventory. I know what a failed indexing spring feels like, and this is a failed indexing spring. Have you worked on this specific optic at this specific temperature before?" "I've worked on optics in cold conditions plenty of times. At negative 30, after 12 hours of cold soak in an uninsulated transport case." Womack hesitated. It was a small hesitation, barely a fraction of a second, but Elena saw it. He had not. "The principle is the same," he said. "The principle is not the same. At negative 30, steel contracts at a rate of approximately 0.006 millimeters per degree Celsius per meter of linear dimension. Your scope body is 340 millimeters long. Do the math. The contraction is cumulative across 3 ring interfaces. It creates play that mimics mechanical failure, but resolves itself when the weapon is warmed. And what do you propose we do? Put the rifle in a warming oven for 6 hours? We don't have 6 hours. You don't need to warm it. You need to compensate for it." Elena stepped forward, and now her attention was entirely on the rifle, the familiar shape of it, the weight of memory that came with every line and curve. She had not touched a precision weapon in 3 years, and yet her hand remembered exactly how it should feel. "The play is in the turret assembly," she said, "but the turret is just the interface. The actual optical elements are held in position by the inner ring, which is more stable because it's protected from temperature extremes by the outer body. You can't fix the turret slop, but you can work around it." "How?" Harmon asked. His voice was genuine curiosity, not challenge. He was young enough to still want to learn. "You set your windage and elevation, then you lock the turret caps tight and don't touch them again. The play only manifests when you turn the dials. If you don't turn them, there's no drift. You make your adjustments, verify with a calibration shot, and then you don't adjust further. One chance. You have to get it right the first time." "That's insane," Chin said. "You're talking about a 2,300-meter shot in crosswinds. Conditions change. The shooter needs to be able to make corrections in real time. The shooter needs to be good enough to not need corrections. Nobody's that good." Elena did not respond. She was looking at the rifle now, really looking at it, and something in her expression had shifted. It was not arrogance. It was not confidence. It was something quieter and more dangerous. The look of a person who knew exactly what they were capable of and had spent 3 years being told they were wrong. "What's your name?" Womack asked. "Voss. Elena Voss." "And where did you learn to diagnose optics malfunctions?" Elena Voss. "Here and there." Before anyone could respond, Colonel Holt's voice cut through the space like a blade. "What the hell is going on here?" He stood in the doorway, framed by the inadequate light from the corridor behind him, his expression carved from something colder than the mountain air. "Sir," Womack began, "the contractor was just—" "I can see what the contractor was doing. What I want to know is why a vehicle mechanic is standing over my precision rifle offering opinions on optics calibration." Elena turned to face him. She met his eyes without flinching, without looking away, without any of the deference that her position should have demanded. It was not defiance. It was simply the posture of someone who had spent too many years in rooms like this to be intimidated by rank. "I was offering a diagnosis," she said evenly. "The one your armorers have is wrong." "Is that so?" Holt stepped into the room, and the space seemed to contract around him. "You've been here, 6 weeks? Working on HMMWVs and generators. And now you're telling my senior armorer, 22 years of experience, that he doesn't know how to diagnose a weapons malfunction." "I'm telling him the malfunction he's diagnosed doesn't exist. The scope isn't broken. It's cold. The steel has contracted. It's creating play in the turret assembly that feels like a mechanical failure, but isn't. If you set the calibration correctly and lock the turrets, the rifle will hold 0 for a single shot. A single shot. That's all you need." The operations center door opened behind Holt, and 2 more figures appeared. Calloway, the intelligence officer, and Decker, the designated shooter. Both looked exhausted, both looked worried, and both stopped short when they saw the tableau in the equipment bay. Holt did not turn around. His attention was fixed on Elena with the intensity of a man who had spent 3 decades learning to read people and was currently reading something he did not understand. "Let me make sure I understand this," he said. "You're a civilian contractor, a vehicle mechanic. You have no formal training in precision weapon systems, no operational experience with long-range shooting, and no authority to be in this space. And you're telling me that you can fix a problem that 3 qualified armorers cannot?" "Yes." "On what basis?" Elena paused. This was the moment where she could tell the truth and watch everything unravel, watch Holt pull her file, discover who she really was, and immediately bar her from any involvement because contractors with classified backgrounds were liabilities, not assets. Or the moment where she could deflect, offer just enough to be credible without revealing the full picture, and pray that competence alone would be sufficient. She chose the middle path. "I've worked with cold weather shooting systems before. Not officially, not in any capacity you'd find in a personnel file. But I know what thermal contraction does to steel optics, and I know how to compensate for it." "Not officially," Holt repeated. His voice had dropped half an octave, which was never a good sign. "Not in any capacity I'd find in a personnel file. So you're telling me you have hidden expertise that you've been concealing from this command. I'm telling you I can fix your rifle. And why should I believe you? Because your alternative is to wait 48 hours for a replacement part while your target disappears forever." The silence in the room was complete. 14 men had gathered now. Armorers, operators, support personnel, all of them watching the standoff between the colonel and the contractor like spectators at a duel. Holt's jaw tightened. Something flickered in his eyes, frustration maybe, or something closer to anger. "Miss Voss," he said, and the formality was its own kind of weapon. "I have commanded men in combat for 30 years. I have run operations in conditions that would kill most people who've never worn a uniform. I have buried soldiers who died because equipment failed, because intelligence was wrong, because someone somewhere in the chain made a decision they weren't qualified to make. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" "I understand." "Good. Then you understand that I am not going to hand a classified precision weapon to a vehicle mechanic based on her claim that she knows things that aren't in her file. You understand that this mission, the one we have waited 9 weeks to execute, is too important to gamble on the opinion of someone who should be checking tire pressure instead of touching optics. You understand that whatever you think you know, you are out of your depth here." Elena absorbed the words. She felt them land, felt the weight of dismissal, the familiar sting of being categorized and filed, and dismissed based on what she appeared to be rather than what she was. She had felt it before, in 100 rooms like this one, from 100 men like Colonel Holt, but she had also learned, in those 100 rooms, that arguing rarely worked, that defending herself only made men like Holt more certain of their conclusions, that the only thing that ever changed minds was demonstration. "Then let me prove it," she said. "Excuse me. Give me 90 seconds with the rifle. I'll diagnose the fault, demonstrate the compensation technique, and verify it with a calibration shot. If I'm wrong, you've lost 90 seconds. If I'm right, you have your weapon back." 90 seconds. That's all I need. Holt stared at her. The room held its breath. In the corner of his vision, Womack made a small motion. Not quite a shrug, not quite a nod, but something that suggested he didn't entirely hate the idea. 90 seconds, Holt said finally. Not a second more. And if you damage that weapon or waste my time, you will be on the first transport off this mountain the moment the weather breaks, and your contract will be terminated before you reach Bagram. Understood. Womack, give her the rifle. The senior armorer hesitated only a moment before reassembling the weapon with practiced efficiency. Stock, action, barrel, optic. The components came together with the precision of long practice. When he was finished, he set the rifle on the bench and stepped back. Elena approached. She did not reach for it immediately. Instead, she stood there for a moment, looking at it, letting her eyes trace the familiar lines. The M2010 was 49.5 inches long with a suppressor attached, weighed 17.6 pounds fully loaded, and could put rounds on target at distances that would have seemed impossible a generation ago. She had fired weapons like it thousands of times. She had trusted her life to them. She had trusted other people's lives to them. She had also trusted her career to them, and that had not ended well. Elena reached out with her right hand and lifted the rifle. The weight was exactly what she remembered. Substantial but balanced, the stock settling naturally into the pocket of her shoulder despite being held one-handed. Her left hand hung uselessly at her side, the bandaged fingers unable to grip, unable to assist. She would have to do this alone. 32 power variable, she said, half to herself. Leupold Mark V HD. First focal plane. Christmas tree reticle. 56 millimeter objective. The turrets are capped 20 MOA per revolution. You transported this 60 kilometers in a hard case at negative 20 degrees, which means approximately 14 hours of cold soak, assuming you loaded it at the departure point after the temperature dropped last night. Womack nodded slowly. That's correct. The steel body has contracted. The three-ring construction means contraction is cumulative at the interfaces. Your turret play is approximately 0.04 millimeters at the contact points, which translates to roughly 3/4 of MOA of unpredictable zero shift every time you turn the dial. How do you know that number? Because I've seen it before. Different rifle, same phenomenon. Cold weather precision shooting has its own physics. Elena balanced the rifle against her right hip, freeing her hand to work the turret caps. She unscrewed the elevation cap first, her fingers moving with a kind of speed that came from muscle memory rather than conscious thought. The click of the turret felt wrong, too soft, too imprecise. Womack had been right about the symptom. He had just been wrong about the cause. The parallax is set for 600 meters, she said. That's your default. But at 2,300 meters in these atmospheric conditions, you need it set for infinity minus a quarter turn, approximately 1/8 counterclockwise from the stop. She made the adjustment one-handed, her fingers finding the tiny parallax ring by feel, turning it the precise amount required. Elevation. You've been zeroed for standard conditions at sea level. We're at 11,000 feet. Air density is approximately 71% of sea level. Your bullet is going to fly flatter, but the reduced air resistance means less spin stabilization. You need to add half a click of elevation to compensate for the altitude density differential. Click. Half a minute of angle. The turret moved, and Elena felt the play that Womack had described, the slight mushiness in the mechanism, the lack of positive feedback. But she also felt the turret settle into position and stay there. Windage. What's your current setting? 0 for no wind, Womack said. 2 MOA left to compensate for a shooter-induced cant. The wind is coming from the northeast at 30 knots with gusts to 45. At 2,300 meters, that's going to push you around approximately 47 inches to the right at the point of impact. but you're shooting southeast, which means the wind is quartering. Real lateral component is about 70% of full value. Call it 33 inches. That's 2.4 MOA right to a correction. She dialed the windage. 48 clicks counterclockwise. The turret protested, the play making each click feel uncertain, but Elena counted precisely and stopped exactly where she needed to be. Lock the caps, she said. Don't touch them again. She handed the rifle back to Womack. He took it reflexively, still processing what he had just witnessed. That took 41 seconds, Harmon said. He had been counting. You said 90. I need a calibration shot to verify. Then you need to set up the platform for the primary engagement. What calibration shot? Holt demanded. We can't fire a weapon without. There's a steel plate at the base of the eastern observation point. Elena interrupted. 400 meters. It's been there for years. Someone used it for zeroing practice. I can see it from the motor pool bay roof. One shot. Low charge. The suppressor will contain the sound to acceptable levels. Nobody outside this compound will hear a thing. You're talking about firing a weapon in a combat zone during an active operation. I'm talking about verifying that your rifle can make the shot that matters. If I'm wrong, the calibration round goes low left and you know the compensation didn't work. If I'm right, you have a verified weapon ready for deployment. Holt looked at her, looked at the rifle, looked at his armorers, who were standing in various states of disbelief. You're telling me you can make a 400-meter shot one-handed. I'm telling you I can verify a zero at 400 meters. The shot is irrelevant. What matters is where the round lands relative to point of aim. And you've done this before. Yes. When it mattered, the moment stretched. Holt was not a stupid man. Far from it. 30 years of command had honed his instincts to a razor edge, and those instincts were telling him something important. This woman was not what she appeared to be. Vehicle mechanics did not diagnose optical systems with this level of precision. Civilian contractors did not handle rifles with this level of familiarity. The woman standing in front of him knew things that her file said she should not know, and that meant one of two possibilities. Either she was lying or someone had lied about her. Either way, he was out of options. One shot, he said. Womack supervises. If the round lands more than 6 inches from point of aim, you're done. You go back to the motor pool. You stay there until transport arrives, and you never touch a weapon in my command again. And if it lands within 6 inches, then we have a conversation about what else you're not telling me. Elena nodded. She did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply turned toward the equipment bay door and began walking toward the eastern observation point. The walk took 4 minutes through 2 feet of snow. The wind had dropped to 28 knots, still brutal but manageable, and the visibility had improved slightly, perhaps 50 feet instead of 30. Elena moved with the careful deliberation of someone who had spent time in conditions like these before. Each step tested before weight was committed, her bandaged left hand tucked against her chest for what little warmth her core could provide. Behind her, Womack followed with the rifle. Holt brought up the rear, his presence a reminder that this was not trust, it was verification. The observation point was a reinforced concrete platform extending from the compound's eastern wall, 12 feet square, rimmed with sandbags and equipped with spotting scopes that could resolve detail at 5 kilometers on a clear day. Today, the scopes were useless. The snow blurred everything beyond 100 meters into an undifferentiated white haze. But Elena could see the steel plate. It was barely visible, a dark rectangle at the base of a rock outcropping 400 meters downrange, probably installed by some long-departed sniper team for exactly the purpose she was about to use it for. Set up the shot, she said. Womack placed a rifle on the platform's firing ledge, extended the bipod, and stepped back. The weapon lay there like an accusation, elegant, deadly, waiting to prove someone right and someone wrong. Elena knelt beside it. The cold of the concrete bit through her pants immediately, and she could feel her joints protesting the position. She was 29 years old, but 3 years of civilian work and inadequate training had taken a toll. She was not as flexible as she had been. She was not as fast. But some things, the deep things, never went away. She pressed her right shoulder into the stock, wrapped her right hand around the grip, let her left hand rest on the concrete beside her, useless but present, a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. The scope picture swam for a moment, then steadied. 400 meters. The steel plate was a gray smear against a white background, but she could see its edges, could identify its center. The reticle settled. The wind was pushing from her right at approximately 18 knots. The quartering angle reduced the lateral component significantly at this range. She exhaled. Half out. Hold. The trigger broke at 3.8 pounds. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. Controlled recoil. The suppressor doing its work. The sound reduced to a muffled crack that the wind swallowed almost immediately. 400 meters away, a spray of snow erupted 1 inch below the center of the steel plate, and 2 inches to the left. .3 mils low left, Womack said. He had a spotting scope pressed to his eye, his voice carrying particular neutrality of a man who was processing something unexpected. Wind shifted. You were compensating for 18 knots, and it dropped to 12 in the time between your setup and trigger brake. Elena nodded. She had felt it. That last second shift in the pressure against her cheek, the slight reduction in the sound of the wind. Her adjustment had been perfect for conditions when she settled behind the rifle. By the time she fired, the conditions had changed. That was precision shooting. That was always precision shooting. You made your calculations, you trusted your skills, and then the world shifted, and you had to trust that you had built in enough margin for error. At 400 meters, 0.3 of a mil was a minor deviation. At 2,300 meters, it would have meant a miss. The rifle is verified, Elena said. She pulled back from the scope and stood, her right knee protesting the cold concrete. 0 is stable. The compensation technique works. You have your weapon. Holt was standing behind her. His expression had shifted, not softened exactly, but changed. Something in the set of his jaw suggested that he was revising calculations. The wind shifted, he said. Yes. You compensated for one condition and fired in another. I compensated correctly for the condition that existed when I made my adjustment. The condition changed after. That's not a calibration failure. That's atmospheric variability. And at 2,300 meters? At 2,300 meters, you need to time your shot to a calm between gusts. The current storm pattern is producing sustained winds of 30 knots with gusts of 45, but there are windows, moments where the wind drops to 10 or 12 knots for 4 to 6 seconds. Those windows are your opportunity. Fire during a window, you hit. Fire during a gust, you miss. How do you know when the windows will occur? Elena paused. This was the question she had been waiting for, the question that would either establish her credibility or destroy it entirely. Bring your meteorological officer, she said. I'll show you. 20 minutes later, Elena stood in the operations center surrounded by equipment that should have intimidated her and people who definitely did. The meteorological technician, a staff sergeant named Park, had pulled up real-time weather data from the compound sensors and overlaid it with satellite imagery that showed the storm system rotating over the mountains like a massive white wheel. Current sustained winds are 32 knots from the northeast, Park said. Gusts are peaking at 47. Temperature is -31 Fahrenheit and dropping. Visibility is 30 feet at platform level. The storm is centered approximately 80 kilometers to our northwest and moving southeast at 14 kilometers per hour. What's your window? Holt asked. He was seated at the command table, flanked by Calloway and Decker, all three watching Elena with expressions that range from skeptical to curious. The primary window begins at approximately 1,340 hours, Park said. The storm's rotation will create a localized calm as the eye wall passes. Winds will drop to 15 knots sustained, gusts of 25, for a period of approximately 90 minutes. After that, the secondary wave arrives with worse conditions than we have now. If we're going to make the shot, it has to happen during that window. 90 minutes, Calloway said. That's generous. Our intelligence says architect appears at the window at 1352. We have 90 minutes to position, sight, and fire. We don't have 90 minutes, Elena said. Everyone looked at her. The meteorological model is based on station data and satellite imagery, she continued. It's accurate for macro-level predictions, but imprecise for micro-level events. At 11,000 feet in complex terrain, you're dealing with localized wind currents that the models can't account for. Mountain thermals, valley channeling. The gap between what the model predicts and what actually happens at the shooting platform can be significant. How significant? Holt asked. The primary window won't begin at 1340. It will begin at 1352. The model is 12 minutes slow because it's not accounting for the thermal differential between the eastern ridge and the valley floor. The cold air is pulling against the ridge and delaying the calm phase. By the time the window opens, you'll have approximately 40 minutes before the secondary wave arrives, not 90. Park's face went pale. That's not possible. The models are correct for the data they have. They don't have data on the thermal pooling because you don't have sensors on the eastern ridge. But I've been watching the wind patterns on the motor pool bay roof for 6 weeks. The thermal effect is consistent. The models are always 12 minutes slow. Holt leaned forward. You're telling me our weather window begins exactly when our target appears at the window. I'm telling you the universe occasionally provides convenient timing. The window opens at 1352. Architect appears at 1352. You have approximately 40 minutes to make the shot before conditions deteriorate. And within that 40 minutes, how many of your calm moments will there be? The 4 to 6 second gaps. At the shooting range we're discussing, you only need one. But based on the pattern I've observed, you'll have approximately 6 to 8 opportunities during the window. The gaps occur roughly every 5 minutes, corresponding to oscillations in the wind cycle. You've been tracking this. I've been paying attention. Holt sat back. His expression was no longer dismissive. It was not quite respectful either, but it was something approaching consideration. Miss Voss, he said, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I'm going to expect a direct answer. Who the hell are you? Elena met his eyes. She could feel the weight of every person in the room watching her, waiting for her to reveal what they all sensed was hidden beneath the surface. I'm a civilian contractor, she said. I fix vehicles and generators. That's what my contract says. That's what I do. That's not what I asked. That's all I'm authorized to tell you. Authorized? Holt's voice carried a new edge now. You're authorized. Everybody has a file, Colonel. Even the people you dismiss as vehicle mechanics. The operations center fell silent. Holt's jaw tightened, and for a moment Elena thought she had pushed too far, that his pride would overcome his pragmatism, and he would throw her out of the room just to prove that he could. But Holt had not survived 30 years of command by letting pride win over mission necessity. Decker, he said, his eyes never leaving Elena. What's your status? The designated shooter shifted in his seat. He was 34 years old, a staff sergeant with 8 years of precision shooting experience and a wall of qualifications that would have impressed anyone who cared about paperwork. He was also visibly uncomfortable. Sir, I'm combat ready, Decker said. But I have a concern. What concern? The cold, sir. I've been on the observation platform for the last 6 hours during equipment prep. My hands are, he hesitated. My trigger finger is compromised. I've got about 15 degrees of numbness from the first knuckle down. I can pull a trigger, but I can't feel the break the way I need to for a precision shot. Elena watched Holt's expression shift, watched the realization dawn. You're telling me your trigger finger is numb. Yes, sir. I can make the shot at 400 meters. Maybe 800, but 2,300? In these conditions, I need to feel the trigger. I need to know exactly when it's going to break, so I can control my breathing, my movement, everything. If I can't feel it, I can't control it. And you're telling me this now? I didn't realize how bad it was until 30 minutes ago, sir. I've been warming my hands on the generator exhaust, but the nerve response isn't coming back. The medic says it could be hours before full sensation returns. Maybe days if there's deeper damage. Holt turned slowly toward Elena. His expression was unreadable, but Elena could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. The rifle was fixed. The weather window was predicted. The target was confirmed. And the shooter was compromised. Callaway, Holt said. Who else is qualified on the M2010? The intelligence officer consulted a tablet. Specialist Harmon has the certification, but he's never deployed on an operational shot. His qualification range is 1,800 meters, and that was under controlled conditions. 2,300 in a blizzard is beyond his verified capability. Anyone else? No, sir. The rest of the unit is specialized for close quarters work. The precision shooting billet has always been Decker. Holt closed his eyes, opened them, looked at Elena. Miss Voss, Colonel, I have a mission that must be completed in the next 4 hours. I have a rifle that a vehicle mechanic just calibrated better than 3 qualified armorers. I have a weather prediction that I'm told is more accurate than my official meteorological assets. And I have a shooter who can't feel his trigger finger. Elena waited. Can you make the shot? The question hung in the frozen air. Somewhere outside, the wind howled against the walls like something trying to get in. Elena thought about Architect, about the 12-year-old boy in the back room, about the 11 soldiers who had died because of one man's networks, one man's systems, one man's ability to design death from a distance. Yes, she said, I can make the shot. One-handed. At 2,300 meters. At 2,300 meters. In a blizzard. Colonel, Elena's voice was flat. In 2018, in a mountainous region that I am not authorized to name, I made a confirmed engagement at 2,800 meters using a weapon system similar to the one on your platform. The atmospheric conditions were adverse. The window was 6 seconds. I was alone, unsupported, operating under circumstances that required extraction within 90 seconds of firing. I made the shot. The target was confirmed hit. That operation does not appear in any file you have access to because it was classified at a level that your command authority does not reach. But it happened, and the skills I used that day have not gone anywhere. Holt stared at her for a long moment. You're telling me you're a precision shooter. I'm telling you I was. I'm telling you the circumstances of my separation from that role are complicated and classified and not relevant to the question you just asked me. What is relevant is whether I can make this shot. The answer is yes. With one hand. I've been compensating for injuries my entire career. This is not the first time I've operated with a compromised limb. It's not ideal, but it's manageable. Holt turned to Decker. Staff Sergeant, your assessment. Decker hesitated. He had watched Elena diagnose the rifle, watched her make the calibration shot, watched her predict the weather window with a precision that made the official meteorology look amateurish. He was a proud man, and having his role given to someone else, especially a civilian, especially a woman, was not easy. But he was also an honest man, and honesty demanded that he acknowledge what he had seen. Sir, he said slowly, I don't know who she is. I don't know where she came from or what she's done, but I know what I saw on that platform. The way she handled the rifle. That wasn't someone who'd learned at a civilian range. That was operational experience. Thousands of hours of it. If she says she can make the shot, I believe her. Holt nodded once. His expression had not changed, but something in his posture had shifted. The rigidity of command settling into the acceptance of a decision made. Miss Voss, he said, I am authorizing you to take position on the observation platform at 1,345 hours. You will fire on Calloway's confirmation of target identification. You will report any changes in atmospheric conditions to the operations center in real time. And when this is over, you and I are going to have a very long conversation about security clearances and need to know. Understood. Womack, prepare the rifle for deployment. Decker, you're on spotting. Park, I want continuous weather updates from now until mission completion. Holt stood, his chair scraping against the floor. We have 4 hours. Let's not waste them. The observation platform at 1,350 hours was a study in controlled chaos. Elena lay prone on the concrete. The rifle settled into her shoulder. Her right hand wrapped around the grip with a kind of familiarity that came from muscle memory rather than conscious thought. Decker was beside her. Spotting scope pressed his eye, calling wind readings in a voice that had gone hoarse from the cold. Wind 270 at 34 knots. Gusting to 42. Not yet. Not yet. Elena watched through the scope. The compound 2.3 kilometers away was barely visible through the snow, a gray smear against a white background. The second floor window, just distinguishable as a darker rectangle within the smear. She had dialed in her hold. 2.4 MOA right for windage, half a click elevation for altitude. The turrets were locked. She would not touch them again. Her left hand rested on the concrete beside her, useless. The frostbite had progressed beyond pain into a kind of distant numbness that she tried not to think about. If she kept the hand elevated, kept it covered, the medic thought she might retain most of the function. If she kept lying on frozen concrete in -30 temperatures, all bets were off. She stayed on the concrete. 1,351 hours. Calloway's voice came through the earpiece. Target expected in 60 to 120 seconds. Elena breathed. The scope picture was steady despite the wind. The rifle's weight and the sandbag rest absorbed most of the vibration, and she had anchored herself with her right elbow pressed into a depression in the concrete. She could feel her heart rate settling, dropping toward the 60 beats per minute that she needed for the shot. The cold helped. The cold always helped. It slowed everything down: metabolism, nervous system, the tendency of muscles to twitch at exactly the wrong moment. 1,352 hours, Calloway said. Thermal imaging confirms multiple signatures in target structure. Second floor, east side. Wind coming down, Decker said. His voice had changed, sharper, more focused. 31 knots. 29, 27. The window was opening. Elena felt it before she heard the numbers confirmed. A shift in the pressure against her cheek, a reduction in the snow driving into her face. The storm was pausing, exactly as she had predicted, exactly when she had said it would. 24 knots, Decker said. 22, 21. Visual on target. Calloway's voice was taut. Signature moving toward east window. 10 seconds to visible exposure. Elena's world narrowed to the scope picture. The gray smear of the window was sharpening as the visibility improved, the edges becoming defined, the interior darkness becoming distinct. She could see movement now, a shape approaching from inside, the thermal mass of a human body, growing larger as it approached the glass. Target at window, Calloway said. Confirmation positive. Architect, engage at will. The window was open. Architect stood there, binoculars raised to his face, scanning the terrain with the paranoid thoroughness of a man who had spent 6 years not being found. Elena could see him now, not clearly, not well, but well enough. The crosshairs of her reticle settled on the center of the dark mass. 2,300 meters. 1.4 seconds of flight time. The bullet would drop approximately 43 feet over that distance, but her elevation hold accounted for it. The wind would push it right, but her windage hold accounted for that too. Wind 18 knots, Decker said. Steady. You're in the window. Elena exhaled. Half out. Hold. The trigger pressure built under her finger. She could feel the mechanics of the action through her hand. The sear engaging. The spring compressing. The precise moment approaching when everything would release. 3 pounds. 3.5. 3.8. The rifle fired. The recoil pushed her back, controlled and absorbed. The suppressor reducing the sound to a muted crack that the wind swallowed immediately. Through the scope, she watched the snow pattern shift, watched the disturbance of the bullet's path through the atmosphere, watched the 1.4 seconds stretch into eternity of waiting. The target dropped. Hit, Decker said. His voice was flat, professional, containing no emotion because emotion had no place in this moment. Confirmed hit. Target is down. Target is not moving. Elena stayed behind the scope. She watched the window for another 30 seconds, watching for movement, watching for any sign that she had missed, that the target had survived, that 6 years of hunting would continue because of a failure she could have prevented. There was no movement. Target confirmed Kia, Calloway said through the earpiece. Mission complete. Elena pulled back from the scope. She sat up slowly, her joints protesting the cold, her left hand screaming as blood flow shifted. The wind was picking up again. 24 knots, 28:32. The window closing exactly as she had predicted, the secondary wave arriving on schedule. She did not feel triumph. She did not feel satisfaction. She felt the same thing she felt every time she had pulled a trigger and watched someone die. A kind of empty weight, a heaviness that settled in her chest and would not leave for days or weeks or years. Architect was dead. 11 soldiers were avenged. A 12-year-old boy in a back room was not brought back to life. Elena stood. She handed the rifle to Decker, who took it with hands that were shaking. From cold, she thought, or maybe from something else. She turned and walked toward the stairs that led down from the platform, moving carefully on the ice, moving slowly because there was nowhere to go. Behind her, Holt stood in the doorway of the operations center, watching her descend. His expression was unreadable. For days later, Elena Voss was gone. The storm had broken on the second day, revealing a landscape transformed by snow into something alien and pristine. The supply birds arrived on the third day, bringing replacement parts and fresh personnel, and the mundane necessities that kept a forward operating base operational. Elena had continued her work, vehicle maintenance, generator repair, the contract obligations that justified her presence, as if nothing had changed. On the morning of the fourth day, Holt found an 11-page document on his desk. It was handwritten in precise, economical script, and it covered every piece of equipment in his command: the armory maintenance procedures, the generator failover protocols, the vehicle service schedules, the meteorological observation practices, the training gaps in his precision shooting program. It was comprehensive, professional, and completely unauthorized. A civilian contractor had no business auditing a forward operating base. A vehicle mechanic had no business evaluating weapon systems and operational protocols. But a precision shooter who had just made an impossible shot in impossible conditions, that was someone whose opinions might be worth reading. Holt read the document 3 times. Then he pulled up Elena's personnel file, the version available to his clearance level, and read it again. The same sparse information, the same careful vagueness. 8 years of service, honorable discharge, contractor work. Nothing that explained how a vehicle mechanic could calibrate a rifle one-handed in 94 seconds or predict weather windows with more accuracy than official meteorological assets. He made a call to a friend at JSOC. He made another call to a contact in the intelligence community who owed him a favor. He called in the favor. The classified file arrived by secure courier on the 6th day, after Elena was already gone. Holt read it alone in his quarters, the pages illuminated by the inadequate desk lamp, his expression shifting through confusion, disbelief, and finally something that looked uncomfortably like shame. Elena Voss had been one of the finest precision shooters her service had ever produced. Her confirmed engagement at 2.8 kilometers remained a record. Her operational assessments had been consistently rated as exemplary. She had deployed to theaters that Holt himself had never been cleared for, conducted missions that would never appear in any congressional briefing, and built a record of service that should have earned her a command position, not a discharge. The targeting failure was documented in excruciating detail. The faulty intelligence, the thermal imaging limitations, the 12-year-old boy in the back room who had died because of a chain of errors that began long before Elena ever settled behind her rifle. The investigation had found no fault in her judgment, no failure in her actions, no violation of any rule or regulation. But someone had to carry the weight, and the someone had been her. She had been quietly separated, discarded, sent to fix vehicles on forward operating bases while younger, less capable shooters took the shots she had trained them to make. And she had come back. She had positioned herself on this specific mountain at this specific time because she knew, somehow, in a way the file did not explain, that architect would eventually return. She had waited 6 weeks. She had fixed generators and HMWVs and watched the weather patterns and said nothing to anyone about who she really was or what she could really do, until the moment it mattered. Holt set down the file. He sat in the darkness for a long time, thinking about the woman he had dismissed as a vehicle mechanic, thinking about the way he had spoken to her in front of 14 men, thinking about the moment she had met his eyes without flinching and told him she could fix his rifle, and he had nearly refused to let her try. "The men in that bay will remember how you spoke to me," she had said just before she departed. They had been standing outside the motor pool, the snow falling softly around them, the transport bird waiting on the pad with its rotors already turning. "The way you treat someone like me tells them what's permissible." Holt had not responded. He had not known how to respond. He had simply watched her walk toward the bird, her left hand still bandaged, her back straight, her pace unhurried. She had not asked for an apology. She had not asked for recognition. She had not asked for anything except to be allowed to do what she had always been capable of doing. And when she had finished, she had left without waiting to be thanked. In the weeks that followed, Holt changed. Not dramatically, not in any way that an outside observer would easily notice. But Calloway noticed. Decker noticed. The men who had been in the equipment bay when Holt had dressed down a vehicle mechanic in front of 14 witnesses. They noticed. Holt asked more questions in briefings. He spoke in interrogatives rather than declaratives. He read the maintenance assessment Elena had left behind and implemented every recommendation, including the ones that made him uncomfortable because they implied he had been doing things wrong for years. The generator that Elena had repaired ran for 93 days without incident, the longest continuous operation in the compound's history. It was not a transformation. Calloway wrote later in his personal journal, try and make sense of what he had witnessed. It was a small, practical adjustment in the behavior of a man who had been genuinely surprised by something and had decided quietly to take it seriously. Elena Voss was never assigned to grid reference November 7th again. Her contractor work continued at other forward operating bases, in other theaters, fixing vehicles and generator for units that never knew what she had been capable of. She never applied for reinstatement to any precision shooting program. She never requested acknowledgement for the shot that had eliminated a target responsible for the deaths of 11 soldiers. But in the motor pool bay at the freezer, someone had painted a small symbol on the wall beside the main workbench. It was a simple design, a crosshair with a single snowflake in the center, and no one ever admitted to creating it. It remained there for years, fading slowly as the paint weathered, visible only if you knew where to look. The men who had been there that night knew where to look. And when new personnel rotated through and asked what the symbol meant, the veterans would exchange glances and offer the same answer every time. Just a reminder, competence doesn't always look the way you expect. Elena Voss's story shows us that excellence doesn't wait for permission, and real authority comes from capability, not rank. If this kept you engaged, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. Tell me, if you were Colonel Holt, would you have let a vehicle mechanic touch that rifle? Subscribe if you haven't already. More stories like this are coming. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next one. Somewhere, in a location that appeared on no public map, a woman with a damaged left hand and a classified file full of impossible achievements continued her quiet work. She did not seek recognition. She did not expect vindication. She simply did what she had always done, remained capable in a world that had decided she was not, and waited for the next moment when capability would be the only thing that mattered. The compound changed in her absence. The men who served there told her story, passed it down, let it become part of the institutional memory of a place that officially did not exist. And Colonel Raymond Holt, 30 years of command behind him and however many remained ahead, learned something that night on the freezer that no formal training had ever taught him. The most dangerous assumption a leader can make is that he knows everything about the people in his command. Sometimes the person who saves a mission is the one you dismiss before you ever let her speak. Sometimes a vehicle mechanic is the best shot you'll ever see. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get a chance to realize that before it costs you everything.